A major fight broke out on X yesterday, Twitter, between the presidency and the Minister of Home Affairs. The fight happened on X, or Twitter, so this means that it was seen by not only regular South Africans and regular members of the international community, but it was definitely seen by the whole diplomatic community, and it has become the subject of discussion in many embassies across Pretoria. A fight of this nature shows the serious divisions right now between the Democratic Alliance and the ANC on foreign policy, and it also shows the delicate nature of the issues that are being discussed within the international community about foreign policy. But the fact that this fight broke out the way that it did on Twitter is worrying, because diplomatic issues are not meant to be fought out on the streets in this manner. And in general, outside of diplomacy, you should never hang up your dirty linen in public. Or you should never write about, for instance, being addicted to pornography in your autobiography. Those pages will be used against you later. Those fights will be used against you later, which is why in diplomatic relations, you often speak very softly, with measured words, with measured tones. You definitely don't have a fight on Twitter about delicate issues of diplomacy and international relations. So here's what happened. At 4 p.m. yesterday, the Minister of Home Affairs announced the following: I am honored to announce that in my capacity as the Minister of Home Affairs representing the Republic of South Africa, I have signed an historic agreement granting visa-free access to our country for Ukrainian holders of diplomatic, official, and service passports, and vice versa. We continue to see Ukraine as a valued ally, as a valued friend who supported us right from the beginning, from the days of our struggle against apartheid right through to now. I look forward to President Ramaphosa adding his signature to this agreement in the coming week so that we can conclude this important step forward for relations between our two peace-loving nations. Seems innocent enough. The only thing that's there that's a little bit of a, if you were looking, is the fact that the DA says, no, Mr. President, our ally is not Russia, our ally is Ukraine. Because if you recall, at the BRICS summit, President Ramaphosa proclaimed that Russia was an ally to South Africa, which is a strong word, ally. And in the diplomatic community, any word, like when you were a teenager, there was a big debate between you saying, I like you to a girl, and I love you. Like is not love. Love is not like, For me personally, I remember one of the biggest issues which bothered me for many weeks was when this other lady said to me that I was cute, not handsome. Ha! Cute, not handsome. Cute is for puppies, Moss. Handsome is for man. I wanted handsome. I don't want cute. So, that word ally. If I was bothered as a teenager between like, love, cute, handsome, imagine how much more diplomatic institutions are concerned about words such as ally, because it has a lot of bearing. So aside from that dig, that statement seemed, fine. Minister of Home Affairs is sharing his honor to be signing these Ukraine visas and vice versa. 2 hours later, 6 p.m., the spokesperson for the president jumped on him on Twitter. He said, listen, Wena, the president is yet to sign the minute authorizing the minister to sign the agreement with Ukraine. It is unclear how the minister can announce the signature of an international agreement without prior formal authorization to do so. Wow. Okay, so there's no authorization. What's happening? Remember now, first tweet, maybe some people are like, but that tweet was seen over 500,000 times by that time. Then the spokesperson for the president comes in 6 p.m. Now, everybody in the diplomatic community is watching. And everyone in the diplomatic community is watching because they can see. When there's just a generic tour, Rihanna versus Taylor Swift or whatever the case is, social media will be moving. Imagine how much more diplomatic missions will be moving when they see this kind of contradiction happening between serious offices such as the Ministry of Home Affairs and the Presidency on social media. So now there are going to be questions. Okay, was this not authorized, etc.? Then 3 minutes later, the Minister of Home Affairs, Leon Schreiber, responds, "It is unclear why the Presidency is unclear, since you announced the very same thing in a whole statement earlier today." Then at 7 p.m., the Democratic Alliance issued this particular statement, and this is what they said.
The Democratic Alliance welcomes an announcement today by Minister of Home Affairs Leon Schreiber that the Republic of South Africa intends to grant visa-free access to our country for Ukrainian holders of diplomatic, official, and service passports. This development is a poignant show of solidarity by South Africa with the people of Ukraine, an Eastern European country which served as a haven for many anti-apartheid activists during the struggle, and where many exiled South Africans advanced the fight against a racially oppressive regime from abroad with the aid of Ukrainian resources and support. The DA also welcomes this announcement as a crucial move to advance South African diplomacy and position our country as a diplomatic authority in the ongoing Russian invasion of Ukraine. South Africa's recognition of Ukraine and its rights to sovereignty is a far better approach to addressing this invasion than the ANC's open support of Russian President Vladimir Putin and his conquest of Russian empire, which is a clear violation of international law. Ukraine has always been an ally in the fight against the systemic disenfranchisement of South Africa's black majority by the apartheid government. The move to grant visa-free access to Ukrainian diplomats, officials, and servicemen and women is a long overdue recognition of this country's immense contribution to the fall of the apartheid state. By granting Ukraine equal diplomatic standing within our own borders, this development would give effect to South Africa's constitution and the principles of democracy and human rights enshrined within it, to strengthen our diplomatic arm to promote peace and stability and a respect for the state's sovereignty around the world. Finally, South Africa is making strides to give back to the many countries from both the East and West who fought and lobbied valiantly against the apartheid regime for decades and who helped South Africa eventually usher in a peaceful transition to democracy. As the DA, we will welcome our Ukrainian brethren to our country in the shared spirit of peace, sovereignty, and stability as we continue to lobby for South Africa to take up its role on the international stage as the continent's bastion for democracy and human rights.
So the Democratic Alliance was actually right when they said on social media that this was, whatever they were announcing was consistent with what had been announced by the presidency earlier. And maybe the spokesperson, Vincent Magwenya, had not seen it, or maybe there was now tension because the DA was now trying to claim something that Minister Ronald Lamola also wanted to take claim to the very next day. Because what was said by the presidency at 4 a.m. and what is happening on Monday is that the ANC Minister Ronald Lamola is going to sign something as well with the Ukrainians, but he's not the only person who's signing because he's signing as the Minister of Foreign Relations, right? But the Minister of Home Affairs actually is the authorized minister, and it seems as if he's being shut out, and as a result of being shut out, they felt that they need to speak first and take ownership of this because they view Ukraine to be their issue, their baby, so to speak. But this is what was said at 4 p.m. yesterday on Sunday. If you watch this maybe at a later stage, on Sunday, the 27th of October, 4 p.m., this was what was said by the presidency, the statement that they issued.
Presidency asserts responsibility and stance on South Africa's foreign policy. Date of statement, October 27, 2024. On the August 20, 2023, ahead of the South African-chaired 15th BRICS Summit, President Cyril Ramaphosa delivered an address to the nation on South Africa's foreign policy. In the address, President Ramaphosa articulated the principles and values that shape our foreign policy and inform our international relations when he said, "Before the dawn of democracy in 1994, the apartheid South African state was a pariah in the international community, condemned for committing a crime against humanity. The foreign policy of apartheid South Africa was defined by coercion, destabilization, and military aggression. Since the advent of democracy, South Africa's foreign policy has been based on what our forebears inscribed in the Freedom Charter in 1955. When they declared that, South Africa shall be a fully independent state which respects the rights and the sovereignty of all nations. South Africa shall strive to maintain world peace and the settlement of all international disputes by negotiation, not war. The president further affirmed South Africa's foreign policy as a vital element of our nation's progress. South Africa's strong relations with other countries manifested through investment and trade relations that can contribute to the growth of our economy, create more opportunities for new businesses, and create jobs. President Ramaphosa has been steadfast in maintaining South Africa's commitment to the policy of active non-alignment. South Africa has resisted pressure to align with any one of the global powers or with influential blocs of nations in their pursuit of power contestations that are unfolding in countries across the globe. The president observed during his foreign policy address that, during the Cold War, the stability and sovereignty of many African countries was undermined because of their alignment with the major powers. This experience has convinced us of the need to seek strategic partnerships with other countries, rather than be dominated by any other country. While some of our detractors prefer overt support for their political and ideological choices, we will not be drawn into a contest between global powers. Instead, our country strives to work with all countries for global peace and development. It is this resolute adherence to the policy of non-alignment and to the prescripts of the Freedom Charter which informed our Constitution that South Africa continues to contribute towards the attainment of world peace and silencing the guns on our continent, in declaring President Putin and the people of Russia as valuable friends and allies. President Ramaphosa was not projecting any particular country or bloc of countries as the enemy. Similarly, as a country that has no enemies, South Africa regards the members of BRICS as friends. It is through the policy of non-alignment that South Africa has been able to constructively engage with both Russia and Ukraine. In several engagements, President Ramaphosa has emphasized the centrality of the United Nations Charter and the need for peaceful dialogue in resolving conflict. In the process, South Africa has also maintained its strong historical ties with the Russian Federation, whilst enjoying cordial diplomatic bilateral relations with Ukraine. South Africa has also been unwavering in advocating for a peace process that includes the full participation of both countries. On October 28, 2024, South Africa's International Relations and Cooperation Minister, Honorable Ronald Lamola, will host his Ukrainian counterpart, Minister Andriy Sybiha. Amongst the highlights of the visit will be the signing of an agreement on visa waiver for diplomatic service or official passports. This will enable South African officials to travel to Ukraine for peace formula meetings without visa logistical impediments. This development, which has been in the making since 2020, signals South Africa's commitment to growing diplomatic relations with Ukraine. Within the first 6 months of the year of South Africa's G presidency, our country will also host the South Africa-European Union Summit. South Africa is the only partner in Africa amongst the EU's 10 bilateral strategic partnerships. The summit will further enhance the existing partnership with the European Union. South Africa will continue working towards strengthening the strategic, trade, and political bilateral relationships with key partners including the People's Republic of China, the United States of America, Germany, Japan, India, and others. South Africa will further consolidate the full implementation of the African Continental Free Trade Area, which is set to eliminate trade barriers, boost inter-African trade, and achieve prosperity for all of Africa. The AfCFTA will also accelerate manufacturing and industrial capacity on our continent, as President Cyril Ramaphosa continues to lead the 7th administration in strengthening all key political and trade ties, working in solidarity with the oppressed peoples of the world in Palestine and Western Sahara, while advocating for peaceful resolution of conflicts around the globe. South Africa will maintain a foreign policy that is informed by solidarity, peace, equality, human rights, and sustainable development for the benefit of all. This is the responsibility that President Ramaphosa will continue to exercise without any undue pressure and in line with South Africa's national sovereign interest. Issued by the Presidency.
So at this point, you could be thinking what's going on. At one level, it seems to me that there is an issue just of credit. Who's going to take credit for this particular signing? Right? The DA wants to take credit. The ANC wants to take credit. It's about egos. It's about recognition. It's about status on the international stage, how you are able to navigate that. That's at one level what seems to be going on. But there's more. So let's start with some clarifications. There was some confusion on social media. This is not visa-free entry for all Ukrainians into South Africa. This is something that came up a lot online. It was almost a misconception that the DA basically removed all visa requirements for Ukrainians. They can just come to South Africa anytime they feel like. No, that's not what's happening here. This is for holders of diplomatic service or official passports. A diplomatic passport is not for every Simpiwe, Sia, and Anele. No. It's a very specialized passport for a few number of people. People who work in embassies, people who work in parliament, people who work maybe at senior levels of government. These are the types of people who get this passport. Every MP in South Africa doesn't have a diplomatic passport or official passport. You have to almost navigate the waters to even get that. And if they don't like you or think you're important, you may not even get it as a member of parliament. It's not a guarantee. So this is not everyone's passport. This deal is not for everyone, right? And there's also some confusion or disputation around who's responsible for this being signed, right? This is not just the result of the Democratic Alliance and them being in the government of national unity, although it's also not just as a result of ANC policy. The discussions did start around this visa in 2020, but they actually stalled. There was no political will to see this through. No appetite from the South African diplomatic corps to go through with this. Because even though they say there's non-alignment, South Africa leans very often towards the Russia direction more than it does towards the Ukraine direction. It seems as if things shifted recently. And the only change that could have accelerated or been a catalyst to this shift, and we can't ignore that, is because the DA and the ANC went into coalition in June of 2024. That's the only difference. This is the thing that shifted the dynamics and created new pressure, because it's very clear what the relationship is between the DA, Ukraine, where they stand on that particular issue, ANC, Russia, where they stand on that particular issue. But that's not the only reason why it shifted. There's something else that's coming up, and that is the South Africa European Union Summit, which is happening in 2025. So also, that would have been a factor that could have changed the political appetite aside from all of the dynamics. So I don't think that the ANC can simply say, no, we were always going to do this. This was all our plan all along. You know, there's that... I think it's a Marvel series on Disney. I'm not sure. I don't watch these things, but it's called Agatha All Along. So the ANC guys on social media are trying to say it was ANC all along. We wanted to do this. We didn't need any help. So I don't think that is 100% accurate or genuine. So you may be asking yourself at this point, but why is this fight really happening? I'm going to give you my reasoning, and you can tell me what you think about it as we have a conversation. Here's what I'm seeing, and this is my line of thought. The Democratic Alliance has been losing domestic fights against the ANC in their coalition. For example, they're on the ropes with the Bella Act, and they're on the ropes with the NHI, National Health Insurance. And the best that they have been able to do is to buy some time, negotiating time. The president says, no, I'll give you 3 months to come back to me on 1, 2, 3, etc., etc. But as pointed out to Sunday Times by Minister Khumbudzo Ntshavheni, Bella and NHI are now the law of the land, meaning they are irreversible at some level. The DA has recognized this and perhaps has decided that the best negotiating strategy with the president is not locally and within the local media, but on the international stage. The rationale seems to be that domestically, Mr. Ramaphosa has lots of influence and control in the media landscape. He's able to avoid scrutiny from News 24 and ENCA on various issues. News 24 has been very aggressive in looking at President Paul Mashatile, but very soft in looking at Phala Phala, for example, right? Why could this be the case? Why is it possible for Mr. Ramaphosa to have a little bit of room to maneuver within the local media? For instance, it's because of the owners having other interests. If you think about it, the owner of ENCA, Johan Rupert, whose company Remgro owns 30% of eMedia Holdings, which is the entity that owns ENCA, he has other business interests like the Energy Exchange of Southern Africa, where his company will basically be selling electricity to municipalities, the electricity that comes from IPPs. They will provide electricity to him. He sells, gets a share of the stake. This is similar to what he's doing with Vumatel, which he owns, by the way. So if I own ENCA, I'm not going to be aggressive against a business ally, because, as you know, Patrice Motsepe is also very involved in the IPP sector. So the interest of Johan Rupert and the interest of Patrice Motsepe, they coincide within the energy sector. And as a result of that, you lose appetite to be critical. Even if you can see something is wrong, you're not going to say it through your media entities in the way that you could, right? Think about Naspers. Naspers are the owners of News 24 and City Press, right? Through Media 24, an entity that they own. But they have other business interests like Takealot. And right now, they want Shein and Temu to actually be, taxed more. so that they can protect the local industry and themselves. They are having issues with Amazon. So as things stand right now, would you be very critical of one of the guys who's helping you? No, you wouldn't be. Right? Your interests are taken care of. These business owners are the same business owners who have been contributing to the president's project management office. Same companies, same CEOs. So they're not going to have an appetite to criticize President Ramaphosa locally. But the dynamics are totally different on the international stage. On the international stage, the media landscape is dominated by the interests of American billionaires, UK billionaires, and the global powers such as the United States of America, UK, France, and the European Union. The international media scene is dominated by publications such as the Financial Times, CNN, the BBC, Sky News, The Guardian, Fox News, and others. France 24. These entities are not likely to be prone to the same incentives and pressures that exist for ENCA and for Media 24. In fact, ENCA, Media 24, they don't matter on the international stage at all. These guys are not looking at that. And the interests of billionaires such as Jeff Bezos take precedence. Interests of billionaires such as Tim Cook, etc. These are the people whose interests are going to be pushed forward by the international media, not necessarily the domestic media. And as you know, the interests of the USA and the EU are to protect Ukraine, to defeat Russia. The West also has lots of concerns about China. The West controls credit ratings and the international lenders, such as the IMF and the World Bank. They control institutions such as the World Economic Forum. Mr. Ramaphosa is keen to maintain his relationships with the West, with the IMF, with the World Economic Forum, with the World Bank. He's keen to maintain, he wants to be welcome. When King Charles is having events, he wants to be able to walk with the royal guard there in the UK by Buckingham Palace, etc., etc. The DA appreciates all of this. They appreciate these dynamics, and they've decided we can't fight locally about these issues. We're not going to have leverage. Let's go international. Let's start also playing that game of donors and rating agencies, etc., investors, because President Ramaphosa cares about this and he cares about his international reputation. So they're trying to, because they see that they can't win it locally, they're now going to fight internationally. That's my theory. That's what I'm seeing. I don't know what you think. The DA, I think, also appreciates that the American elections could change things significantly. Before the elections, they were traveling to America, building relationships with the Republicans. There's a very real risk. Not risk, but reality. There's a very real reality that Donald Trump could win this election. And if he does, that does become a risk to certain things that South Africa cares about, right? I'm going to explain what I mean. Donald Trump could win this election, and that is likely to embolden Republicans who have been expressing some concerns about South Africa. One of the big fights, which is on the horizon, is whether South Africa should remain in the AGOA relationship, which is the American Growth and Opportunity Act. You may not know much about AGOA, but let me give you a quick summary, just in case you haven't been following. South Africa is a beneficiary of the African Growth and Opportunity Act, AGOA, which is a United States Trade Act. AGOA was enacted as American law on the 18th of May 2000 as public law of the 200th Congress. As a nation, South Africa exports a significant amount to America. In fact, America is the second largest export destination, second only to China. And according to the South African Revenue Service, in 2022, the United States of America received 7.8% of South Africa's total exports. According to the U.S. Department of Commerce, the value of exports from the United States of America to South Africa in 22 was 6.5 billion or 130 billion rands at that particular time, using the exchange rate at that time. The value of imports from South Africa to the USA was 14.6 billion or dollars or 280 billion rands. So it's almost, in fact, it is double, right? Double exports from South Africa to USA than imports from America into South Africa. So the balance of trade between the two countries is demonstrably favorable to South Africa. Now, AGOA beneficiary countries, right, they benefit from a special relationship with America in that they qualify for duty-free access under AGOA. And under this duty-free provision, 60 billion rands of South African goods were exported to the United States of America duty-free. In addition to AGOA, there is something that is known as the United States Generalized System of Preferences, the GSP. Under the GSP, right, South Africa exported 11 billion rands of goods to America. In totality, South Africa had 72 billion rands worth of exports under preferential terms to the United States of America in 2022, right? So you can see the significance of this relationship and status with America. Qualification for AGOA preferences is not just loose. It's based on strict conditions which are contained in the AGOA legislation. In order to qualify and to remain eligible for AGOA, an AGOA beneficiary country must demonstrate respect for rule of law, human rights, core labor standards. And an important provision that is additional to those fundamental requirements is that beneficiary countries should also not seek to undermine U.S. foreign policy interests. Beneficiary countries should not seek to undermine U.S. foreign policy interests. AGOA includes a statutory requirement for annual reviews to examine the compliance of each participating country with the Act's eligibility criteria. South Africa is now in some version of a review process. This is what happened. In February this year, a motion was tabled. This motion, or a bill was tabled rather. The bill is the U.S.-South Africa Bilateral Relations Review Act. And this U.S.-South Africa Bilateral Relations Review Act passed the House Foreign Committee. What am I saying? It passed the House Foreign Affairs Committee. So it went out of committee into Congress, right? Effectively, the Republicans and the Democrats in Congress initiated a process that calls into question South Africa's foreign policy positions and contends that South Africa is siding with the United States enemies and acting as a proxy for rivals of America, in that it's actually undermining the U.S. foreign policy interests. So this legislation then passed the lower chamber of Congress by a vote of 272 to 144 as an amendment to another bill. It's not yet law. It still needs to pass the Senate and to be signed into law by the White House, right, by the president. The legislation, what it says, it obliges the president to fully review America's bilateral relationships with South Africa and to publicly release a report on whether the country has engaged in activities that undermine U.S. national security or foreign policy interests. It also requires a third report on the extent of South Africa's defense cooperation with Iran, China, and Russia. Can you see where the challenges are? Can you see where the tension is? So there's a real risk that South Africa could lose access to AGOA, and if that happens, that will cause a significant fall in the value of the rand, and the markets will no longer be enthusiastic about President Ramaphosa's second term. You're likely to see a media backlash if AGOA is lost, even bigger than what was seen by President Zuma. And my hypothesis is the DA knows all of this. And this is why now, just as we're going into the US election, which is happening next week, the fight is playing out in this way. They know that they have leverage in the West. They know the level of unpopularity of Russia, of Iran in the West, and the concerns that continue to exist around China. So I think this is why we're seeing this fight play out in the way that it's played out. There are some discussion points that I just want to close off with. The first one is this idea of non-alignment. Is non-alignment really possible anymore? I don't think it's possible in the way that it was in the 1990s. I think that the 90s, China was weaker, and I also think that South Africa had a lot of grace because of President Nelson Mandela and also because of the brand new democracy. I think that the Mandela government was given a lot more space because of the stature of Mandela, right? And I think that because the democracy was new, they were not going to be punished for having strong relationships with parties and entities that had helped the ANC fight the apartheid regime. 30 years later, I think a lot has changed, right? Between 1994 and 2024, a lot has changed. The EU currently is putting major tariffs on Chinese cars. America has banned Huawei, and there's a major war playing out between Russia and Ukraine, and NATO is supporting Ukraine in various ways. UK, France, EU, all of these entities view Russia as a threat to their existence. So things have changed significantly, and I don't think equally that the position is still non-alignment. I think so many things have happened which seem to give the impression that the ANC government is closer to Russia than they are to Ukraine, closer to China than they are to the West. Many instances have played out like that. So the question then becomes, even though you're saying there's non-alignment, is there really non-alignment? And I don't know whether the Western community still believes there is. Now, the challenge then becomes Trump. He doesn't like gray area discussions. He's like a black and white type of guy. And this type of nuanced position may not work on him, right? He's somebody who's like America first. If you stand against America, you are an enemy of America. The good news with him is that he has softer relationships with Putin, and even though he respects Xi Jinping, he doesn't necessarily have a strong relationship with him in the way that he does with Putin. But it could help that he has respect for Putin. Maybe then, there'll be a backdoor to talk to. And Elon Musk also has strong relationships with Xi Jinping and Putin. But it may very well be that if this issue comes push to shove, Republicans may feel emboldened, and Trump may feel that, but South Africa, it's a small player, I'm going to go for them. Send a message to China through South Africa. So it's a real risk, something that we need to be aware of. So that's the first thing I wanted to just say in closing. The second thing is that there's a question that I have often when I read statements like the one that was given by the presidency. And that question is the foreign policy position of South Africa consistent? On the one side, they say they're non-aligned, right? And then they say they stand for human rights. But sometimes on this human rights question, there are major contradictions. And I'm going to give you 3 examples that I've been thinking of. The Zimbabwean elections, the SADC observer mission say that the elections were not free and fair. But South Africa attended the inauguration of Emmerson Mnangagwa, one of the very few countries to do that. And also the ZANU-PF government has been accused of committing atrocities, significant atrocities. So if you stand for human rights, why are you not standing for the human rights of Zimbabweans? That's the question. Then Mozambique elections. Right now, Frelimo has won the elections in Mozambique, quote unquote, won the elections, but there were so many issues. Opposition leaders were killed. Lawyers for opposition were killed. People who were protesting were repressed, suppressed, oppressed. This is not the first time there have been issues with elections in Mozambique, right? The Europeans and the international community has condemned the killing of opposition leaders, except for SADC, except for South Africa. The Frelimo presidential candidate was hanging out with Fikile Mbalula just a few weeks ago. How can you say you stand for human rights but support human rights abuses in Mozambique? United Arab Emirates and Sudan. The ANC government has hosted Omar al-Bashir, who was a dictator in Sudan, implicated in the commission of a genocide in 2003 in Darfur, where black Christians were killed. Implicated. He was gallivanting in South Africa. Then, this year, Mohamed Dagalo right, who is the leader of the Rapid Support Forces, the same entity that, by the way, was implicated in committing the genocide in Darfur. He is the guy who's leading the rebel forces in Sudan, fighting the war, causing lots of commotion. Apparently, over 100,000 people have died in Sudan. Somebody who was in South Africa earlier this year. Then, even more significantly, Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed, MBZ, the president of the United Arab Emirates, has been taking holidays in South Africa, landing in private airports in the Eastern Cape, living on a private farm that he bought in the Eastern Cape. Why is he significant? His government is the one that is accused of UAE, of supporting the rebels, the RSF in Sudan, and the rebels in Libya. Don't forget that there's been conflict in Libya for a very long time. And things have kind of stabilized now, but Libya is actually being run by two different militaries separated into two, and thousands of people died. One of those groups, Khalifa Haftar, he's been the Libyan National Army. He's been supported by the UAE. So the point I'm trying to make is, if you stand for human rights, why are you ignoring the support of the Rapid Support Forces by Mohammed bin Zayed, MBZ, president of UAE, which has led to atrocities and human rights violations in Sudan? Why are you ignoring that? Why are you hosting Mohammed Dagalo, who's also known as Hemeti, who's accused of having committed the genocide also in Darfur in 2003 with Omar al-Bashir? In fact, he was the guy on the ground. Why is he being hosted? So the point that I'm making is that when it comes to these issues of human rights, there are some inconsistencies, significant inconsistencies that I think are worth pointing out. But yeah, it looks very messy right now, because having these diplomatic spats on the international stage, on platforms such as X, 7 days before an American election, it doesn't look good for the DA and the ANC in this GNU. To have a spokesperson of the presidency having a tit-for-tat battle of words with the Minister of Home Affairs on social media, it's not a good look. It's not a good look. What do you guys think, though? Let's have a conversation. Till the next one.